In exactly 71 seconds, 847 terminated careers would expose the largest political purge in the history of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A purge so methodical and numerically precise that it could no longer be dismissed as coincidence or bureaucratic drift. And Senator Amy Klobuchar did not expect the personnel record to tell this story so cleanly when her staff first assembled the data, just as FBI Director Kash Patel did not expect anyone to slow down long enough to line up termination dates, assignment histories, and replacement credentials side by side, and the fired agents themselves did not expect their professional lives quietly erased through sealed HR actions and non-disclosure agreements to ever be reconstructed into a single devastating narrative. Yet, as C-SPAN cameras rolled and captured every tightening jaw and flicker of calculation across Patel's face, documented evidence replaced partisan suspicion with something far more dangerous to him, prosecutable fact, and the question that would dominate headlines for months crystallized into a single, unavoidable inquiry: how did a Minnesota senator with a prosecutor's instinct uncover a systematic loyalty purge that had hollowed out FBI senior leadership and replaced career investigators with political operatives, loyal not to the Bureau or the Constitution, but to an administration determined to bury certain cases forever? The answer, as it turned out, began not with ideology but with numbers. Because numbers do not argue back, and the numbers were stark: 847 senior agents terminated, 312 field office reassignments to remote or professionally dead-end postings, 94 whistleblower complaints filed internally or with the Office of Special Counsel, and one sprawling spreadsheet that tracked every personnel action against employees who had touched investigations involving the president, his donors, or his allies. But even that was not the most alarming part, because the real problem was not just who had been removed, it was who had replaced them. Room 226 of the Hart Senate office building buzzed with the particular tension that precedes confrontation, the kind of anticipatory quiet that settles when seasoned observers sense that a hearing will not end politely. Morning light cutting across the mahogany dais where senators prepare to question an FBI director whose tenure had become synonymous with controversy. As Kash Patel sat at the witness table radiating the aggressive confidence that had defined his rapid rise through conservative legal circles, 45 years old, dark suit sharply pressed, FBI badge polished to a mirror sheen, his expression carrying the defiance of someone who regarded congressional oversight as political harassment rather than constitutional duty. His path to the Bureau's top job had been unconventional: congressional staffer, National Security Council official, acting director of national intelligence, and then suddenly the head of the nation's premier law enforcement agency. Critics calling him a loyalist with no meaningful law enforcement experience, supporters hailing him as a reformer sent to dismantle a corrupt deep state. But today it would not be slogans that decided which description fit. It would be documents. Across the chamber sat Senator Amy Klobuchar, the 64-year-old Minnesota Democrat whose prosecutorial background had made her one of the Judiciary Committee's most methodical interrogators. 4 thick binders arranged neatly before her, each marked with FBI personnel classification stamps, the product of 6 months of investigation into what her staff had come to call the loyalty purge. The first binder documenting terminations, the second reassignments, the third whistleblower complaints, and the fourth kept closed until now, documenting the replacements, the binder that would ultimately destroy Kash Patel's career. When Chairman Dick Durbin called the session to order and framed it as an examination of FBI personnel practices and leadership accountability, Patel leaned forward eagerly, welcoming what he called the opportunity to address politically motivated attacks against his efforts to reform an agency he claimed had been weaponized against the American people, immediately signaling his strategy to portray every question as partisan and every document as resistance from entrenched interests, a strategy Klobuchar had anticipated from the beginning. She began simply asking how many senior FBI personnel had been terminated, reassigned, or placed on administrative leave since Patel's appointment 14 months earlier. And for the first time his expression faltered, a micro pause visible to the cameras as he claimed not to have exact figures readily available, prompting Klobuchar to open her first binder and calmly recite the numbers from Patel's own HR records: 847 senior agents terminated, 3 112 field supervisors reassigned, 156 headquarters personnel placed on indefinite administrative leave. More personnel upheaval in 14 months than the previous 5 FBI directors combined over 2 decades, numbers that rippled through the chamber as reporters leaned forward and began typing furiously. Patel responded with familiar rhetoric about institutional reform and hostile culture, but Klobuchar immediately shifted from scale to specificity, displaying a correlation chart that cross-referenced termination records, with case assignments revealing that 743 of the 847 terminated agents shared one common factor. They had been assigned to investigations involving administration allies, donors, or the president's business interests, a figure so precise it stripped away any remaining pretense of randomness. She walked through individual cases one by one. Special Agent Marcus Webb, 22 years of service, multiple commendations, terminated 11 days after submitting a report recommending expansion of an investigation into foreign financial transfers connected to the inaugural committee. Supervisory Special Agent Jennifer Torres, 18 years of counterintelligence expertise, terminated while investigating foreign influence operations targeting congressional campaigns. Special Agent Diana Reeves, Public Corruption Specialist, terminated shortly after probing no-bid contracts awarded to firms tied to cabinet officials. Each example reinforcing a pattern that could no longer be explained away as performance-based discipline. Klobuchar then pivoted to the second half of the story, opening the fourth binder and forcing the room to confront what had replaced the purged leadership, laying out comparative data, showing that the terminated agents averaged 19 years of FBI experience, while their replacements averaged 3, that the removed leaders held an average of 4 specialized certifications, while their successors held fewer than 1, and when Patel attempted to dismiss this gap by invoking fresh perspectives, she named names, individuals elevated to senior supervisory roles, whose backgrounds included conservative media commentary, campaign operations, and partisan staffing, but virtually no federal law enforcement or intelligence experience, making clear that loyalty, not competence, had become the decisive qualification. The hearing took a darker turn when Klobuchar introduced internal interview protocols Patel had implemented for supervisory positions, reading aloud questions that asked candidates whether they believed the FBI had been weaponized against political targets, how they viewed the 6th of January investigation, and what they thought about the Bureau's handling of the Hunter Biden laptop, questions that bore no relation to investigative skill and every resemblance to ideological vetting, supported by sworn declarations from 11 rejected candidates who testified they were passed over despite superior credentials, because they would not echo partisan narratives. Yet even this was not the most damaging evidence, because Klobuchar then produced a document titled Priority Personnel Actions, bearing Patel's personal signature, and dated just 3 days after his confirmation, listing 127 FBI employees marked for termination or reassignment, based solely on their involvement in investigations Patel had publicly attacked, annotated with phrases like Russia Team Expedite and J6 Investigators First, a pre-planned enemies list executed with a complete yawn rate exceeding 90%. When Patel attempted to deny its authenticity, Klobuchar cut him off with confirmation that the document had been retrieved from his own office files, and that every name on it had already suffered adverse action. The final blow came when she played audio recordings from senior staff meetings, recordings made by a whistleblower alarmed by the legality of Patel's directives, capturing Patel's own voice stating that anyone who touched the Russia investigation, or the 6th of January, had to go and instructing subordinates to find cause. Any cause to remove protected employees, explicitly framing loyalty as the goal and presidential expectations as the justification. The chamber fell into stunned silence as Patel stood frozen, the bravado that had carried him through years of political combat, collapsing under the weight of his own recorded words, prompting bipartisan outrage, immediate calls for suspension, and a formal motion to refer the matter to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation into obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and violations of federal whistleblower statutes, and within hours the machinery of consequence began moving. First a White House statement announcing Patel's leave of absence, then the deputy director assuming control, then the appointment of a special counsel, And finally, within 24 hours, Kash Patel's resignation as FBI director, ending the shortest and most controversial tenure in the Bureau's history, not with reform, but with documented proof of systematic political corruption, laid bare by numbers that never lied.